Hello, America. It's story time with the Common Sense Conservative, and we're going to tell you a great story today. It's a story about a little election. It's a story where 80 million people admittedly said that they're not necessarily voting for their candidate, but they're voting against the other one. Yeah, no, that's what happened. They didn't necessarily vote for Biden. They didn't really care about Biden. They just wanted to make sure that Donald Trump did not become president. Now, why would that be? Now, Americans are supposed to be educated. Americans are supposed to be first world. Americans are supposed to be, knowledgeable and educated and not petty little children. So you would assume with all of that information that the people who voted against Donald Trump voted against him because they hated his policies. It wasn't because he said mean things and he was just a mean old man and he was just mean and dirty and they didn't like him and because obviously it's got to be a way bigger deal than that because Americans have convictions and principles and so on. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a moment and just talk about some of these policies and so on that these 80 million Americans said that no matter what, absolutely they were against. Should we take a moment and talk about record low Black, Latino, Asian, veteran, persons with disabilities, people without high school diplomas, unemployment, as in like ever in history, or the 3.5% record unemployment, which was the lowest it's been in over 70 years, or the fact that female unemployment was the lowest it's been in about 70 years. Do those things matter? And since we're talking about race, we can't forget to talk about how Donald Trump is a racist, right? I mean, we started off talking about, Black unemployment and Latino unemployment and so on, but all the left has ever said for the last 4 years is that Donald Trump is a racist. Not to mention Donald Trump, but all of his supporters are a bunch of racist white supremacists, essentially members of the Klan or Aryan Brotherhood or, whatever crazy, thing that they say that the only people that voted for Donald Trump were. That's including, of course, the record number of African Americans and Latinos that voted for a Republican ever since the Great New Deal, or I'm sorry, the Great Society. I mean, it's hard to, not confuse the two because they were pretty much geared toward the exact same thing, a welfare state, destroying the family, and so on. But again, those are Democrat policies, and that's what Democrats want because that's what they voted for. That was their policy, and that's what they're trying to keep alive today. Because according to the left, if you're a minority, Black or Latino, then you're incapable of surviving on your own. You're incapable of taking care of yourself, standing up for yourself, and so on. So it would make sense that 80 million Democrats, Republicans in name only, also known as rhinos, and socialist communists and so on, would hate the fact that economically Donald Trump did more for the Black community and Latinos and Asians and women than anybody really since Lincoln. But again, let's move on because that just, would insinuate that Democrats are the same party that they were in the 1860s during the Civil War, slavery and all that good stuff, same party, different plantation kind of a thing. Anyway, well, let's go ahead and move on and talk about what these 80 million people hated to the point where they said, we don't care if who's the president as long as Donald Trump is not the president. Let's talk about these opportunity zones, right? These areas of economic growth that Donald Trump designated strictly for minorities so that they would have more opportunity when it comes to small business and economic prosperity. Let's also go ahead and talk about how Donald Trump allocated more money than any president in history to historically Black colleges and universities by over $100 million. Now, fun fact, there was a previous allocation of $85 million that was brought up by the Bush administration, and weirdly enough, Obama actually took that away. So Donald Trump reversed Obama's deal and then gave it some change as well. Quite a bit of change, about $15 or so million worth of change. Hope and change sounds familiar. Anyway, but again, that must be something that really made the Democrats very angry, hence why the Democrats took it away and the Democrats voted against the guy who brought it back. Why would Democrats be angry at historically Black colleges and universities getting funding? And while we're talking about policies the Democrats put in place, why don't we take a moment and just chit chat for a second about the Biden-Clinton crime bill? You know the one that put millions upon millions of black men in prison, you bet, for minor offenses, for mostly victimless offenses. And Trump reversed that. So that would only make sense why 80 million Democrats and rhinos and so on would vote against Trump, because they really supported that. They supported black men going to prison for little to nothing. And one last little thing on the race issue here. Isn't it crazy how Donald Trump got a higher percentage of the minority vote than any Republican since the Great Society? Something to think about. Something, of course, that Democrats and rhinos are super angry about, and they'll even flat out deny it. They'll just be like, no, that's fake news. That's not even true by any stretch of the imagination. Even though it's a fact, it's widely documented. If you don't believe me, look it up. All right, let's move on past race, because, if we were just to focus on race all day, well, that would make us Democrats. So moving on, we'll talk about the economy as a whole, the whole country, everybody as Americans, because Americans are what matters. And again, we're still talking about what Democrats hate. Democrats hate the fact that we were able to create, even with COVID, over 7 million jobs in 4 years. Obama only created about 12 million jobs. He had a net increase of 12 million jobs in 8 years. Donald Trump, with COVID, so technically only 3 years, was able to create a net plus 7 million. But enough of that. Why don't we talk a little bit about how the median income raised by $6,000 or so? That means the average person, the average family in America made more money. Weird. That's also the highest increase we've had in almost half a century. But besides that, why don't we talk about how so many people came off of food stamps? Oh yeah, about 7 million people came off of food stamps. Not to mention, how, a lot of Democrats and stuff will talk about how the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer and they really hate the rich. Well, under Trump, weird things happened. Like the poor got richer and the rich just kind of stayed where they were. That gap really kind of narrowed quite a bit under Trump. But again, 80 million people voted against that. They voted against all of the policies that made that possible. Like the tax decreases, the corporate tax going down, the businesses and the jobs coming back over here from overseas, the trade deals that was made because of Donald Trump, and so on. All these things that the 80 million people apparently didn't like. The fact that we actually held other countries accountable and we made other countries pay their fair share, and we weren't just a giant blower blowing cash into the world, where we actually made people pay to do business with this country instead of all the freeloading that we had going on for the last forever. 80 million people didn't like that. 80 million people voted against that. Again, they didn't necessarily vote for Biden. They voted against Trump. And it wasn't because Trump said mean things, because Americans are smarter and not petty individuals sitting there crying because he said mean things. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about law and order. Something that 80 million people said, no, we don't want law and order in this country because, defund the police and bring out social workers and so on instead of cops to go deal with people like MS-13, for instance. Weird how MS-13 isn't really, a thing anymore. Kind of like ISIS. Don't worry, we'll get to the Middle East later. Peace in the Middle East. We are voting against the guy who took down MS-13. We're voting against the guy that curtailed human smuggling and, sex trafficking and so on by improving our border security and putting task forces together to go out and eradicate MS-13 from the streets of America. We're going to vote against that. We're going to vote to defund the police, and we're going to vote to put out social workers instead of cops to go deal with people like MS-13. Because that makes sense, because that's what they voted for. They voted for, no bail Biden and crime bill Biden, which is funny because if they're against law and order, but they voted for the guy that wrote the legislation that put millions of black people in jail. Anyway, I don't know. I'm getting confused, which kind of makes sense because the positions are kind of confusing when it comes to, what they say and what they do and what they vote for. But again, if they're against MS-13 getting thrown in prison, which is a Hispanic gang, but they're totally okay with black people being thrown in prison, like Joe Biden wrote in his law, I guess that's actually telling all in itself. Now let's just take a moment and talk for a second about foreign policy, right? I mean, again, 80 million Americans sat there and said that Trump's foreign policy was bad. Peace in the Middle East. Let's just start with peace in the Middle East, okay? ISIS, gone. ISIS doesn't exist anymore. They're gone. Troops in the Middle East, lower than they have been in over a decade. What else should we talk? Oh, Abraham Accords. Should we talk about the Abraham Accords? Actual peace in the Middle East. What is it? 4 countries, Morocco, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and the Sudan, all signing a peace accord with Israel? Weird. And more to come. Like, if Trump was still going to be president, there was more ready to go. Now we'll just see what Joe Biden wants to do. I'm pretty sure that Joe Biden's going to sit there and cave into the Palestinians, like Democrats are used to doing, which is exactly what the 80 million people who voted against Donald Trump want, because Israel to them is just evil. But again, peace in the Middle East and so on, that is not their priority. Their priority is dismantling everything that Donald Trump has done. When it comes to foreign policy, what about North Korea? Crazy, isn't it, that North Korea has kind of been a non-issue for the last 2 years, 3 years or so? Donald Trump actually took the initiative and took the steps to actually talk to him and, kind of figure stuff out. And it's been pretty quiet and very, very peaceful for quite some time now. And amazing how once it's pretty clear that Donald Trump's not going to be continuing to be president, there's threats again. Yeah, North Korea put out another threat. Weird. So weird. And China's talking tough again too. China is all super angry about Taiwan and they're threatening and so on. And it's just weird how Donald Trump brought, China and everybody to the table, and we got these trade deals and we got all these things kind of figured out. And it's really been the most peaceful 4 years that America has seen in a very, very long time. It's just weird to me that 80 million people voted against that. What's it going to be? How long do you think it's going to be till we're in a war again with Biden? I'm sure, we're going to go ahead and give more cash to Iran because, again, that's what 80 million people voted for, was that, giving pallets and pallets of cash to Iran, who still to this day says death to America on social media and doesn't really get censored for it or anything like that, but it's no big deal. Again, 80 million people have spoken. So pretty much, there's a whole long list of other things that Donald Trump has done for this country and positive things that he has done for me and you and everybody else. Look at his tax code, right? No marriage penalty, death tax is gone. So many different things that has helped every single American, 401k, stock market, everything, and job growth. It just goes on and on and on. And so many things that he has done that goes against the whole racial narrative garbage that the left keeps throwing out at him and his supporters. And yet 80 million people refused to see it. 80 million people literally sat there and said, we don't like him. His personality sucks. He's mean. He says mean things. The big picture doesn't matter to these people. That's a problem, America. That's a huge problem. 80 million people literally said, I don't want it. I just don't want it. I don't care. I don't care about any of the good stuff. I don't care about any of the positive policies. I don't care about the great improvements that he has done to this country and in this country. All I care about is I don't like him as a person. And so I'm going to vote against him. Nobody cares about Biden. Nobody votes for Biden. Nobody voted for Biden. Nobody can be that stupid to vote for Biden. There's no rational explanation why anybody would vote for Biden. There's no policy. There's no nothing. The only potential reason to vote for Biden is because they think that he can be controlled by the crazy far left, like AOC and Bernie Sanders and so on. They think and hope and pray that he will go super far left because the dude isn't all there. The guy has shown that he's really way too old and doesn't have the mental capacity to actually be president. The dude can't give you numbers without screwing them up 40 or 50 times. He's not sharp. He's sharp as a rock. He's as sharp as a beach ball. You bet. The guy has no business being president, and yet 80 million people put him in office because they didn't like Donald Trump's personality. I don't like Donald Trump's personality. I am not a fan of Donald Trump's personality. I don't like how he handled his election. Election loss. I don't like how he's handled a lot of different things. However, I still have the wherewithal and the common sense to sit there and go, this is what he's done, and this is why I am okay, and I can back up the reason why I voted for Donald Trump. Is there a Democrat out there that can pick one single policy that they didn't like from Donald Trump? Policy. One policy that Donald Trump did that they hated. And not some stupid semantics. Not some stupid garbage where, his tax increase only helped 4 people. Or this policy here was only geared for white people. Or this policy here was only guarded for the 1%. Wah. Guess what? The 1%, they sign your paychecks. That's what happens. That's what the 1% does. And guess what? Also, when you sit there and say this was only for the 1%, it wasn't just for the 1%. As a matter of fact, very little was done for the 1%. Hence why the rich didn't get richer and the poor did. So tell me, any Democrat who actually watched it all this time, who watched the whole video, tell me one thing that I mentioned or something I didn't mention that you didn't like that Trump did. Justify your vote for Biden.